I'd like to welcome everyone. Again, we will be recording today's session and the recording will be available online for later viewing. You can deactivate your camera if you do not want to be recorded. If you're new to these sessions, the gallery view is what you want to select in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on an iPad, it's in the upper left. That'll give you the best viewing of the session. We are compiling a directory. If you'd like to write your name, where you're located, and who you studied with in the chat box at the bottom, please feel free to do so. It's in the upper right on an iPad. In the directory, we're also compiling a list of teachers. So if you are a teacher and would like to be designated as such, please leave that information there as well. I'm Michael Ward in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. My co-organizer of these sessions is Redmond Entwistle in London. Morning, Redmond. Thank you all for coming today and joining with other students practicing Tai Chi in the lineage of Professor Cheng. These sessions began as a way to stay connected during a time of social isolation and have since evolved into a forum for sharing more of our Tai Chi practice in the spirit of fellowship and scholarship. We meet here every Wednesday at the same time. Please share the details of these sessions with your students, classmates, teachers. All are welcome to come and participate. You're welcome just to attend the top of the hour in which we do a little Tai Chi together. But after we complete the Tai Chi, we will have a discussion either on an element of Tai Chi practice with our guest leader or an aspect of Chinese cultures related to Professor Cheng. We're sending out an email every Monday. Redmond is sending that out. If you're not receiving that email and would like to do so, please let us know and we'll put you on the list. It's just a reminder of what this week's topic is, as well as the following week, and also has in it the link to all the recordings of the previous sessions. Next week, Wednesday, November 11th, is going to be a session on Chinese medicine and Tai Chi. This is part 2, a continuation of Daniel Altschuler's introduction to the basics of Chinese medicine. Next week, Daniel will be looking at the use of herbs and in particular prescriptions made by Professor Cheng for some of his students. Today, we're focusing on Tai Chi and Chinese philosophy, and in particular, Shr Jung. The discussion will be exploring the wider context of Tai Chi and Chinese philosophy, and Shr Jung, the name Professor Cheng gave to both of his schools in Taiwan, in Taipei and in New York. Shr Jung can be translated as correct timing, and we'll take a look at the layers of its meaning both in Tai Chi and in Chinese philosophy. As always, we'll begin following a video of Professor Cheng doing the first third of the form. The video was shot by Ken Van Sickle, and we thank him for giving us permission to use it. We'll go through that twice, and then we'll go to Michael Langenstein to lead the first third. Michael was a student of Herman Koz. He began his study with Herman in 1987 and studied with him regularly through 1993. And after Herman left New York in 93, continued to study with him whenever he would come back with workshops. So if you can get yourselves in position to do the Tai Chi, we're going to go now to Michael, and he'll be, or sorry, to the video Professor Cheng, and then to Michael.
Preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. push, single whip, lift hands, strike with shoulder, white crane spreads wings, brush left knee, play guitar, brush left knee, step forwards, block, parry, punch, withdraw, push, and cross hands. And back to preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. Cross hands.
We'll now go to Michael to lead the final pass through the first third.
Hi, Michael. Hang on a second. We can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Great.
Okay, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Michael Langenstein. I'm here in greetings from Guy Lowtown, New York City. We've been on quarantine for 8 long months, and the only thing that's going to save us is doing Tai Chi. I just wanted to say that it's one way of building up your immune system, and no harm will come to the Tai Chi family. And I guess that's all I wanted to say, and I'll get started.
Thank you.
Preparation. Beginning. Raise hands. Ward off left. Ward off right. Roll back. Press. Push. Single whip. Lift hands. Strike with shoulder. White crane spreads wings. Brush left knee. Play guitar. Brush left knee. Step forwards. Block. Parry. Punch. Withdraw. Push. And cross hands.
Thank you, Michael. We
Oh,
appreciate your willingness to share your fun with us.
You're more than welcome. Listen, I just wanted, I kept a few notes, and I just wanted to read a few notes about Herman. But before I do that, I wanted to show Herman's book. This is a really great guide, a handbook for Tai Chi. And I also wanted to show, in the very beginning, this was a picture of Herman.
Hold it a little closer to the screen. Thanks.
Pretty much how he started. And then after writing that book, he wrote the Push Hands book, which
Hold it up again.
this is a really great, and everything is in here. And this is a picture of Herman. It's a pretty good picture, actually. That's definitely a portrait for the Hall of Happiness, that one. And this is another one of his books, The Martial Spirit. He wrote these books and he wasn't sure why he did it. I don't know. I kind of regretted doing it afterwards. I don't know. And here's another book, The Path to Liberation. I just wanted to say that there is some history there. And I just wanted to read a few notes about Herman. Herman Cause was born in 1929 and just passed away this year, at the beginning of this year, in 2020. He was 91. And there's only two words that I can use to describe Herman, and that is supreme master. Herman said, everything is a gift. And I was introduced to Herman by Janice Salick in 1987. And later Herman told me that Janice is a butterfly, and she is. Janice was the first person that I met when we were art students at the university, or we were in graduate school at the we were in the graduate school of fine arts at the University of Pennsylvania. And in 1993, when Herman left Manhattan, he left the dojo to Frank Dietrich and Janice Salick. And When it came to the class, Herman was always early for the class, and he never missed a class. I never, the whole time I was with him, he always showed up. And I thought of him as like, I thought of him as constant as the sun when it came to his Tai Chi classes. He would say, you have to do it as if your life depends on it, and that there are no second chances. And when it came to showing up for class, he told me, just see yourself there, and you're halfway there. There was no thinking about it or talking yourself out of it, just be there. I thought that was a pretty good lesson, seeing that I never missed his classes after that. After learning the form, I told Herman I got it. I was headed out the door when he told me that the push hands was the other leg of Tai Chi. I was expecting him to sell me down the Tai Chi river on the push hands portion of the class, but that never happened. He said nothing more, not one word came out of the man's mouth. At that point, I decided to stay. Herman's philosophy was you have to do what you're interested in. It's kind of like the Joseph Campbell's concept of follow your bliss. The first thing I learned from Herman was to be balanced. Balanced and don't overextend yourself. It's kind of like with this COVID thing, we have to stay buoyant, like otherwise you start bouncing off the walls. Everything is in moderation, no extremes. In the Yang style, it's known that, wait a minute, sorry. It was my understanding that the line running between the yin and the yang is the Tai Chi. In the Yang style, it's known as the form that hides its power. I thought that was pretty good. The second thing that Herman taught me was to sink, relax, and generate energy. Sink down to your dantian, the body center, and think out of your body, like not up here, down there. And your mind out of the center. And he would say, everything is out of the center. So you need to relax and conserve energy. Generating energy, cultivating chi. He said to sense the opponent's intent and neutralize the opponent's attack. Don't use any more than 4 ounces, and that's the weight of a sparrow. No more than 4 ounces.
Michael, did he say anything about Shr Jung?
He did. He said that he said that sensitivity and timing was everything, and that when it came to picking off your opponent, the timing had to be ripe, R-I-P-E, ripe. And I thought he was very, very good, as Redmond can back me up on in terms of his mastery of push hands. He would say things like, show feelings and not force. And can you imagine if the world could show feelings and not force? We got to stop killing. Killing is force. We don't use force. The Dalai Lama said that we're all one, and that it's not good to take another's life, because it won't be long before they come to take yours.
Well, Michael, we're going to move on to our discussion on Shr Jung. Do you have a summation comment you want to make there?
Yeah, I do. I just want to give everybody the secret. Herman said that the secret was practice, and he ended it with that. And I'd like to end it with the fact that Herman gave us the gift of Tai Chi and said to simply enjoy it. And
Good advice.
that's all I have to say, unless you want to hear some more notes.
Great. No, thank you. We really want to get onto this discussion for Shr Jung, but thank you very much for those notes and also for leading the forum for us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We're going to go now to Renee. Renee is going to be reading something that Ed Young wrote about Shr Jung.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you for asking me to read this. This is a very brief thing that Ed wrote in 1975. And excuse me forgive me ahead of time for slaughtering any pronunciation. I don't speak Mandarin. It's called The Meaning of Shr Jung. Shr means time, opportunity, or at the right moment. Jung means middle, center, or the mean. Shr Jung together literally means at the right moment, on center. Man stands as the connection between heaven and earth. He is subjected to the restrictions of his earthly existence, and he can improve himself through the recognition and study of Taiji principles. When a person comprehends what is meant by on time and in place, he can be centered and balanced in his actions. This is the ultimate of Taiji cultivation in our human world and the meaning of Shr Jung.
Thank you, Renee. Some powerful words. Did you have any comments you wanted to make on that, Renee?
Just very briefly, this is partly a comment and partly a sort of question to be put out into the room, is that I think sometimes the emphasis in discussing Shr Jung is on timing. So the idea of sort of a temporal issue, but I think that if I'm correct, China's called Zhonghua, right? The Middle Kingdom. So I just want to, I hope that we can also discuss the idea of not only time, but physical centering, and the sense that you not only need to be on time, but you need to be centered physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, however you want to discuss it simultaneously.
Great. Thank you for that insight. We're going to go now to Fred Hua. Fred is in a very different time zone, so we're going to let him go first.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Okay. Let me introduce me first. I'm Dr. Tao Binxiang student. I've been practice Tai Chi almost more than 30 years. Now I think today's topic is Shr Jung. So there is a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu. So Lao Tzu say Shr Jung means moving in correct timing. Moving means action. Moving in correct timing. No matter what we are doing, anything, when we are moving in correct timing, everything becomes perfect. By saying we apply Tai Chi Chuan, or we push hands. Two opponents are moving. One interact each other, right? If you can feel, you can neutralize yield to your opponent's force. That means you are moving in correct timing. Also, we practice by the Tai Chi classics. There's striking hand sounds. We can see Peng, Lü, Ji, An should be conscientious. Then your opponent hard to get in. That means you are moving in correct timing. The second, in application of Tai Chi, when someone tries to strike you with 1,000 pounds forces, then you only use 4 ounces to guide him aside. That means you are moving in correct timing. That means you are in Shi Zong. So the second, another principle is he strikes you with 1,000 pounds, okay? Then you also lead him into emptiness. That means you are moving in correct timing. Then you are in Shi Zong. Then the last principle in striking hands sounds, that means stick, adhere, connect, and follow without resisting, without escaping. Then you are in Shi Zong. That means you are moving. You are interacting with your opponent in a correct timing. So from Lao Tzu philosophy, that means everything in Tai Chi or in pushing, we should be moving in correct timing. That means you got a good ability to yield and neutralize. That even in Buddhism, they say, what is the Shi Zong? Means you just can't catch the thing because this is zero and emptiness in between anything, any two. For example, here's a stuff, very soft. You use your hand, push it, then there seems nothing there. That means that the handkerchief shows very good Shi Zong, okay? In Tai Chi push hands, you also doing like this, just like a professor said. Okay, Dr. Tao Binxiang said, when he pushed Professor Zheng Manqing, he feels Professor Zheng just like clothing, okay? Yeah, that means Professor Zheng has a good Shi Zong. I think that's all I want to talk about it. So that takes practice, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. We're going to go now to Russ Mason. Russ has a few things that he's going to share with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a very profound subject, and I feel quite inadequate to address it, but I do want to share with you some wonderful words that I received from some of our elders, and I appreciate Renee reading from the volume 1, number 1 of Shr Jung newsletter Mr. Ed Young's definition of Shr Jung. That's beautiful. I want to share some things that he said to me in answer to a question that I asked this spring, in which I believe he gives a matrix or a kind of a global context to the discussion of Shr Jung that will follow this. So by way of introduction, excuse me for any errors of pronunciation. I'm not a speaker of Mandarin either. Here are the characters for Shr Jung, which I will come back to in a few minutes. Here are the characters for Cai Jichuan. This is courtesy of Mr. Ben Low, his grass writing. And here is the seal script version of the characters for Taiji. So I want to begin by sharing with you something that Mr. Jung said about that. He said the character for Tai is a man standing there, and he's like the character for big. It looks just like the character for big or great or grand, but it has a stroke underneath, a small horizontal stroke, which means excess, the excess of big. So it means extreme or ultimate, or, you know, the extreme manifestation of something. The second character, G, and I'm talking now about the seal script verse, it's easier to see in that. On the right side of that character, you have a line at the top, a horizontal line, which represents heaven. You have a horizontal line at the bottom, which represents earth. And you have a man standing between heaven and earth. He is the upright vertical bridge between heaven and earth. And on his left side, there's a character for mouth. And on the right side is the character for hand. There's a little hand in the bottom right-hand corner of the character. So what this means is that by our action, by our speech, by our words, and by our action, a human being has to stand between heaven and earth. Taiji is about understanding the creation of the two extremes, which have to be kept in balance at all times. And so, and I'm quoting Mr. Jung here, he said, and so it becomes a moral issue. Taiji is not just a physical exercise. It becomes an ethical thing simply because a human being's actions and words have to be in balance at all times, meaning appropriate. So one of the underlying meanings, I think, of Shr Jung is to act in the way that is appropriate in time and place. That's the name that he chose for his school. And it's also, if you've ever visited his home in Taipei, which is now a museum, Uncle Shr Jung has created a museum out of one of Professor Cheng's former residences. And you can see right there by his desk, the Zhou Youming right-hand motto by his desk, which brings in these ideas. And it says Shr Jung at the top of it. So if you look at the seal script, which Redmond so graciously provided us, and in this case, of course, the order of the characters is reversed from what I showed you previously. So reading from right to left instead of left to right. And the first one, the character sure has a sun in it on the left side. And then in the right-hand portion of the character, there's a plant on the top, and there's a hand with a mark on the wrist at the place where you would take the pulse. If you were a traditional Chinese medical doctor and you were checking the pulse, that's the place exactly where you would check the pulse of the body. So it means timely. It means to be in time. It means not too early, not too late, exactly right, perfectly appropriate in terms of time. And the character on the left there, Zhong, means right on the point. It's actually a target. There's a circle that's a target, and the vertical line is like the arrow or the lance that's hitting the center of the target. Really, really important word, of course. It's a name of the country, China, Middle Kingdom, Zhong, central. Both of these characters together have the element of space or placement and position, and then the element of timeliness. And so taking Taiji into action for Shr Jung, that's the name of the school. Now this same second character, Zhong, is the character that appears in Zhongding, which means central equilibrium. Ding has a cover on the top like a roof. Underneath it is a foot, and the toes of the foot come exactly to a line of a limit. So you know that this is the limit. If you know where the limit is precisely, then you're a person who knows where you belong. This is central equilibrium. Now here's something that Mr. Jung said that I thought was really significant and provides a kind of global matrix for our discussion today. He said, these 5 characters sum up what we are practicing. That means that from the head to the center to the base, there's exactly one line, constantly balanced. Dantian in the center, that's your psychic, physical, perhaps spiritual center. So Mr. Jung said, Shr Jung, Zhongding, and Taiji are the 5 characters that we practice. And he said all of these have to do with yielding, they have to do with giving a person what he wants. But there's a limit. There's one place, the center, Yosuo Buwei, you never give up that place. Now, as I understand it, Professor Cheng was a Neo-Confucianist, so the teaching of Confucius was a very big part of his instruction and his worldview. And the character Zhong again appears in the Zhongyong, the doctrine of the mean, an essential text of Confucius. And that character Jung has a utensil with 2 hands, and on top of that is a pestle. So it's the hand that's used to work on the utensil. So this is the character for usage, using the idea of Zhong for balance. So the Zhongyun, the doctrine of the mean, the whole thing is about balance. So we see the concepts of time and space and balance and the upright line, bridging heaven and earth. All of these come into this. Lots of other things I'd like to share, but I don't want to talk too long. I'll keep it short. But if any of you have the comments, Professor Jung's comments in his preface to the Zhongyong, preface to brief comments on Zhongyong, translated by Dr. S.D. Ren. Really, really interesting. Really interesting. I had thought I might read several things from this, but I'm thinking I don't want to go on too long and everybody glaze over and be bored. But Mencius called Confucius the sage of timing. And he said the right way to hold to the median through the course of changes brought by time. So the forces of change, let me just read this one little excerpt. The forces of change remind us of the necessity for an unchanging standard, which Confucius said was the principle of Zhongyun. He said, because Taiji exists, there must be change and exchange between the creative forces of yin and yang. That's what Taiji is. But if it were not for Zhongyong, these forces would go off on tangents and would not meet, condemning heaven to impotence and earth to barren age. It's because of Zhongyong that these forces do not go off course, do not incline or change, and thus it is what the seed of life, it is through this that the seed of life is continually renewed. So these concepts are very profound and enormous, and there's very much that could be said by people wiser than me, so I'll be quiet now and yield the floor to others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ. Really appreciate that. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to you. We're going to go now to Steve Rose. Steve, student of Tam Gibbs. He has a couple things he wants to say as well.
Trouble finding him. Steve, unmute yourself and
Okay, sorry.
Hi, thanks. Great.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is read from notes that I took of Tam's discussion of this subject. The first one are his paraphrases, and then there's a few sentences of his quoting of Professor. Tam paraphrased this way: Shr Jung allows us to control the forces of change. Tai Chi is always to hold level against the, quote, onslaught of time and change. And combined with the fundamentals of the Book of Change, we arrive at the principle which includes the concept of time or timing. And here's a quote that Tam read to us. The most important part of Shr Jung is center of gravity or balance. The next most important place is the, quote, precise timing in center, end quote, Shr Jung. We're constantly centered in that center of balance all the time. The important relationship between center of balance and precise timing, they are mutually interlocking. And he explained it this way, that the Tai Chi is the terminals and Shr Jung is the axis. If there's a 50-50 weight, the center will hold horizontal. However, if there's a change in the terminals, the horizontal will not be kept unless the vertical axis moves over to secure the horizontal, what he referred to as harmony. That the harmony of Tai Chi is supported by the equilibrium of Shr Jung. The idea of the movable center to keep horizontal level has been very enlightening to me in my own, not only in my form practice, but in my push hands practice. I don't really have anything else to say. I only wanted to report to you what it was that Tam had taught to us. This is not everything, but it's what I picked out for today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Steve. And hopefully if you have some other things to say, you can chime in as we go along.
Yes, sir.
We'd like to, Redmond, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
I've just, I can just add a short description from a book on, it's called Confucianism for the 21st Century, and it talks about Shr Jung. So another feature of Zhong Dao is Shr Jung, timely Zhong, which means maintaining Zhong within the flow of time or behaving differently in different times, yet always being correct and appropriate. The Zhong Yong states the Zhong Yong of the exemplary person is that he maintains Zhong in a timely manner and thus is an exemplary person. And it's a quote from Confucius. The Analect states, seeing them, the bird was startled. It flew off and then settled. Confucius said, the hen pheasant on the mountain bridge, how timely, how timely. This passage analogically indicates that an exemplary person should choose in a timely way when deciding the right thing to do in society. Another example of the Shr Jung of Confucius is that he never gave a single definitive and unchangeable definition of Ren, the most important Confucian moral virtue, which is translated as benevolence, humanity, or goodness. Each time his disciples asked about its meaning, he gave different answers according to different situations. He limited himself to pointing out what kind of behavior or acts can or cannot be considered Ren under different particular situations. Timely Zhong means that Zhong, in the sense of correctness or appropriateness, can only occur in particular times and places, and in a particular Zhong happening at this time and this space does not guarantee that it will be Zhong at another time and another space. I'll put the name of the book in the chat for everyone if you're interested.
Great. So we've got some ideas out there. We'd like to open it up now to see if anyone else would like to make a comment either on what's been said or some of your own ideas on the Shr Jung.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I love what everybody said and read from everything. Just a comment really to reinforce that if when we're doing the form, we keep all this in mind. In other words, if you can be present and centered, the sort of Zhongding idea as you do the form, moment by moment, if you're there in the moment, that is the best Zhongyong, Shr Jung, because at each moment when you're both rooted and relaxed, if something comes in, it will respond appropriately. So the appropriateness and the change within the whole body at each moment, it rebalances itself so that as you're doing the form, you are constantly changing. And just a comment
Great.
about that.
No, thank you, Natasha.
So the balance and the rooting and the softness is allows that principle to be active at all times.
Great, thank you. Stanley, you had something you wanted to say?
Yes, this is Stanley. I have several things I want to share. I think one thing earlier, someone mentioned Shr Jung from Lao Tzu. I think it is not correct. And I just checked from the website. I think a very, very simple can find. In Lao Tzu, there's only about the Shou Zong. There's no Shr Jung. And Shr Jung basically from the doctrine of the mean, and also from I Ching, or in fact in Chinese we call I Ching. So I found that the Ed Young's statement many years ago is very correct. Also, Ross, I think that all that point I think is exactly the meaning. And also I want to mention, once I heard about this from my teacher, Mr. Liu. He quote Professor Cheng's wife, Madam Jen. She quoted her, the quotation is about the Zhongding. 终即时中，定无常定. So that meaning, what I can understand, very close to first point Redmond mentioned. That just always keep a zone. So today I found out very interesting is about Shr Jung, two things. That's including time and space. I think this is all the meaning from the Shr Jung. Thank you.
Stanley, would you be able to write it in Pinyin and into the chat bar, the phrase that you mentioned?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe in Chinese characters too, if it's not too complicated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment, question?
I do, if I may.
Sure.
So this is Bob Goodwin. I was originally in St. Louis, then Los Angeles, now in the Ozarks. And we were lucky enough to have Mr. Young visit us 4 or 5 years. And one of his loose translations of Shr Jung was the exact action in the exact direction at the exact time, because we were trying to understand it. And so he loosely translated it that way. And that put a lot of things in perspective for me. Him using the word exact made a big difference on everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Liam.
I have to preface this by saying that this is my understanding and that I'm not a scholar in this area. But my understanding is that Professor was not a Neo-Confucian, that he was a Confucian, that Neo-Confucianism arose when Buddhism, particularly Chan Buddhism, started to make inroads with the general population and began to displace Confucianism, that the Confucians adopted into their teaching modified versions of some of the Taoist understanding of ontology, of the nature of the world, because Confucianism up to that point had only concerned itself with social relations and not with the fundamental nature of the world as Buddhism had. So that in order to successfully compete for the hearts and minds, Confucianism was made to expand. But I don't think that Professor was concerned with competition for the hearts and minds. He was concerned with the correctness. And among other things, the Neo-Confucians changed the set of core texts. And I don't think that Professor was happy, particularly with the central exponent, the most popular exponent of Neo-Confucianism. And that's it.
Thank you, Liam. I'd like to just make a quick comment. I am in no way a scholar on any of this stuff, but one of the things that I've always felt with Shr Jung, the idea of right timing, was its relationship to the flow, and that as we're moving through the form, what allows for the effortlessness of the movement is the fact that in each present moment of unfolding of that flow, we are in the correct timing. We are doing the correct thing at the correct time. And that all that, a lot of what people have said to me really boils down to the idea of the mind and the Dantian, and the flow, the effortlessness of the movement through the form, those constant changes that have to maintain that central equilibrium. Just my 2 cents worth there in terms of Tai Chi practice.
May I put in 2 cents about that?
Sure.
If you look at human physiology, the amount of time on average that's required for a person to respond to something that they see with their eyes, about 1/4 second. The amount of time that's required in order for them to respond to something that they hear is on the order of 3/16 second. The amount of time that's required for them to respond to something that they feel is about 1/8 second. So if you have contact with the person who's attacking you, clearly you can respond to them more rapidly than you can just with eyes. But I think that Professor was pointing to a higher level of skill, and that is by being in harmony in the present moment, you respond in no time. You're just not resisting or there. So it becomes superior to all technique to be in the present moment in contact with the other person.
Great. I think it's also interesting here how what we're talking about with specifics around Tai Chi, relating back to what Russ was saying in the beginning in terms of a larger cosmologic connection, that place is a physical place within us, within our balance in the form, but it's also a place that we occupy in the world and in relation to other people. Anybody else? Other comments?
Yes, I'd like to say one more thing about the horizontal and the vertical. How I use it in my own practice, I have as somebody, I think Russ mentioned the straight line going from the top of the head to the feet through the Dantian. That's the vertical line. There's also a horizontal line that's parallel to the ground. And if I intersect those 2 lines at the Dantian, they make 4 90-degree squares. And when I'm practicing either form or pushing hands, my mind tries to keep myself in this place where the vertical and the horizontal meet to ensure that all 4 of those quadrants equal 90 degrees. If not, I'm either out of plumb or I'm out of horizontal. That's the practical application of the thing that I just read that I learned from Tan. Thank you. I just wanted to get that in.
Great, thank you.
I have a brief comment, I think. Just referring back to what Ed wrote in terms of the ultimate of Tai Chi Chuan cultivation in our human world. This is just for me, for what I try to incorporate in my practice is, of course, right movement, right timing, right direction. And maybe people have implied this in use of the word appropriate. But for me, I would add to right movement, right timing, right direction. I would add right reason. Because, just in terms of practical terms, if I'm doing push hands and I have the right movement and the right time and the right direction, and I uproot the opponent or whoever I'm practicing with, let's get rid of the word opponent. I'm not really particularly happy with myself if the reason why I want to do that is not right. So I'm just throwing that into the room.
Great, thank you. Good thought.
I was told a story at Shr Jung, which mirrors what Renee was saying, that a samurai was sent by his lord to kill a thief who had insulted the lord as well as stealing. So the samurai tracks him over the country and eventually arrives in the place where he expects to meet the thief. He meets the thief.
Folks will not know the answer for a while.
Sorry,
What that referendum will be. We talked to state elections officials who said there'll be
somebody's.
ballots.
Yeah. And so having found the thief, he confronts the thief, and the thief spits in the samurai's eye. The samurai turns around, walks away. And the reason was that if the samurai could perform his duty with perfect detachment, with a correct state of mind, then no ill karma attached to him. But the other person made him angry. And so killing him in anger would be an entirely different thing. All done.
Okay, thank you. So other comments on right timing, right balance, right movement? Right.
If I may,
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Susan.
Oh, thanks. So when I think about all of this right timing stuff, and everything I read in the classics and such, and everything I've heard today, really, but coming out of the experience and the practice, there's this phenomenon that seems to happen with people who practice Taiji, and it has to do with being able to, catch the fork before it falls onto the floor, and before you know it's falling onto the floor. And I just know a lot of people that have done things they can't explain. They move before the thing that would have hit them hits them, and they can't explain it. And so there seems to be, to me, a non-linearity in the as a byproduct that you couldn't train in, that you couldn't or intentionally train in, but we are training in perhaps, and that ends up giving us a sort of positive response ability physically. And so I know there's a line in the classics about only the person who studies for a very long time can suddenly arrive at it. Sometimes that line is translated that way, which would imply an understanding of a non-linear system. So, and when I think about the best pushes I've received, it's been one of those things where sometimes I think, oh, they didn't quite get it. And then I go flying. So, and not feeling anything, and always with delight. So I would just like thoughts on that aspect of timing, if anybody has any. Thank you.
if I may,
Sure.
what I was going to remind us is that our teachers were teaching Shr Jung every time they touched us. I remember oh my goodness. Thank goodness for Mr. Young, Ms. Newman, Robert W. Smith, Uncle Liu, obviously Lo Lao Shr, William C.C. Chen, Dr. Dao. I felt all these people, and every one of them at the time I didn't know it, but was teaching Shr Jung in their tuition. And so we've all had those lessons, and it's in our molecules, and it's up to us to bring those back out and keep that connection. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make one comment, if I can, about, we're all, am I on? Are you hearing me?
Yes, David, go ahead.
I think that there's an issue of semantics that is at least worth mentioning. We all have been talking about right timing and right balance and I think, in fact, it might even be more accurate to think in terms of correct timing and correct balance, because in one sense, right and correct are the same word, but in another sense, right implies a dichotomy of a left, which is, I think, sometimes misleading.
Okay, great. Thank you for pointing that out. So,
I may ask, everybody talking very good, and I really enjoyed it, and like a great puzzle, everybody showing what they know. And I like to ask him, Stanley, if he's still there. Stanley, you said 终极时钟定无常定. Can you explain a little bit, because that's a Chinese, maybe other people don't understand.
Okay, I think here just try to explain what is a 中定. So 中 here just mention 中 is 时钟. That means always. I think here what we can understand probably is always keep the 钟. And 定 is you not always fix at the same position. You can change, even you fix. Yeah, so that's what I understand.
Thank you very much.
Give you what you needed there, Katie?
Yes, I think it's a very good 8 words. It's very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other comments?
Yes, this is Robert Chukro. I wanted to give my thoughts about what Susan just mentioned a little before, and that is being able to do these things so quickly and so appropriately. And there are 2 aspects to it that I think of, and one of them is being in the moment. If you're not in the moment, if let's say you're doing the form and they're thinking of what comes next, which is appropriate for a beginner, but not once your subconscious mind has absorbed and encompassed all of the things that your body is going to do. At that point, once you have that, at that point, as soon as you start to think of, well, now my hand has to be here, and now my hand has to be there, now I have to step. As soon as you think that, you are not in the moment anymore. You are in the future, because you haven't done it yet. Right away, as soon as you are in the future, you now shoot right into the past, because the present goes by. And so now you're behind, which in a self-defense situation would mean that you have a greater chance of losing. But in our daily lives, it could also mean that something could be broken because it falls, or you could have an accident when you're driving your car, etc., or you could fall. And so being in the moment is very important. So it's what I try to do is catch myself as soon as my mind shifts from what's happening at the present, I bring it back. I sort of ease it back into the moment. And my feeling is that whatever you practice, you get better and better at. If you don't think about that and don't practice that, it'll stay the same. The other aspect of it is the training of the nervous system. And as you are feeling what's happening inside and regulating that moment by moment, which is again being in the moment, now you are training the nervous system to be neural pathways and the ability of the nervous system to respond very, very appropriately, very quickly. And that's what we're doing when we're doing the form. And certainly also when we're doing push hands, where we don't have the luxury of guiding everything ourselves because the other person can make a change that now we have to follow. So that's my thinking on that. I could talk more, but I don't want to speak too much.
Great, thank you. I'd like to just quickly comment on something that Liam and Renee mentioned about sort of the right attitude. And it's related also to what Robert just said, is that sometimes in our form, when we're going through it, we can be critical. You know, I'm doing a particular movement and I'm thinking like, oh, you know, I felt off balance there, or maybe I did something really well and I feel like, oh man, this was a tough move. I did that so well. Both those, to get to Robert's point, are me congratulating myself on something that happened in the past, and I'm now in the present, but I'm holding on to the past. And whether that's I did something well or I did something poorly, getting caught in it and holding on to it is not going with the flow. That idea of staying in the present moment with the flow means letting go of whether I did it well, whether I did it poorly. Either one of those holds on to something that's gone when I'm to be in the present. Russ, I wanted to just quickly check back with you and see, you seemed like you had some more thoughts in the beginning. Did those points get addressed, or was there something you wanted to add here?
Something I'd like to add to what was just said, what you said and what Chuck Rose said. There was research done years ago on readiness potentials. Is anybody familiar with that?
Yes.
I heard about this through Mr. Smith, and he was always trying to understand how was it that professors seemed to know what Mr. Smith was going to do before Mr. Smith knew what he was going to do. You know, he seemed to be tapped directly into his nervous system or something. So the readiness potential research shed some light on, you know, chemical changes in the brain prior to your awareness that you've made a decision to act in a certain way.
Russ, this is the research of a gentleman named Libet, and Libet's work has been furthered by other people. And if you want a description of the experiment, I can give it to you. Just let me know.
Thank you, Liam. I'd love to see that. Anyway, the thing that I wanted to comment on in connection to that was the quality of mind that Mike was just referring to. Being in the present moment is essential. If I'm living in the past, I'm in a dream world. If I'm living in the future, I'm just speculating. The present moment is when life is happening. And so Mr. Liu Sihong used to really emphasize that the beginning of everything in Taiji is calm heart, quiet mind. This calmness has to permeate everything from the core of your being. And so you're not watching yourself and making commentary on that or judging whether you think what you're doing is good or bad or thinking about what movement comes next. All of that mind, Mr. Ben Lowe used to talk about the difference between flashlight mind and the kind of 360-degree illumination kind of consciousness that we want in Taiji. And I think this is how we are able to act in a way that is appropriate. It's how I never got to touch Professor Cheng, my loss. He passed before I got to meet him, but you know, Mr. Liu and Mr. Lowe and all the other wonderful elders that I had the privilege of touching. They seemed to know what I was going to do before I did. As soon as I touched them, I felt disoriented. I felt like somebody pulled the rug out from under my feet. And there was a direct experience that was not encumbered by thinking about no intrusion of monkey mind into that. It seemed to be just quiet, calm, centered, so that you could be appropriate, so that you could be in the right place at the right time and act appropriately. So I just wanted to put that thought out there.
Great, thank you. Are there any not beginners are welcome, but anybody who maybe is less experienced? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts either on what you've learned from this session or something, a thought you may have on right timing. Anybody out there who maybe has not been doing Tai Chi for several decades, which is most of our people that speak up have been doing this for a long time. We would really like to hear from some of the rest of you. Any other people with question or comment, something that today's discussion has triggered for you? Don't be shy. Okay, we're gonna have to prod them next week.
Mike, before you go, just to speak up, if you could ask if anyone has any prescriptions from Professor Cheng that they could share with Daniel for next week.
Yeah, next week, as I mentioned, Daniel Altshuler is going to be doing another session on Chinese medicine, particularly herbs and Professor Cheng's prescriptions. And if anyone has a prescription written by Professor Cheng that you'd be willing to share, just let us know, and we can get that to Daniel so he can look at it.
Don't forget about your food.
Part of the presentation. Anybody else of whatever experience level, any other comments before we wrap up today?
Mike, if I may, one more time.
Sure.
Oh, hold on. Here we go. It's Bob Goodwin again. We've been talking about reaction time and lag time. One of my favorite books I use for teaching is How We Decide by Jonah Lehrer. And he covers a lot of what we're talking about, why people can move faster than is technically, empirically, humanly possible. And so it's a very interesting read. It's a New York Times bestseller. No, I don't know him, but a lot of good information. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Closing comment?
Yes, this is Robert one more time. The idea of knowing what the other person is going to do before they do it, I think is summarized in the classics by saying, if the opponent doesn't move, I don't move. If the opponent moves, I move first. Meaning to me that you know what the opponent is going to do before he even decides to do it. Because deciding is already being in the future. So the thing about it is, I studied this thing called ninjutsu for probably 20 years. I think I studied it, and the main thing in that is, the main training is knowing that, learning to do that. That can be trained. Knowing what the person is going to do before he does it, or if the person is behind you and is going to attack you, to know not only what the person is going to do, but when he's going to do it, and to learn to move at the correct time. I can't say I mastered that, but I did get a taste of how to do that. So I'm just mentioning that it can be trained.
Yeah, I'm curious about how all this relates to poker.
May I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
We train in this every day that we take a group class. We move, as a matter of fact, class in a group is the easiest place to study this. We move at exactly the same time that the person who's in front of us is moving. It's easy because we know what they're going to do and we know approximately when they're going to do it, but it is the toe in the door of this kind of skill to coordinate your movement with the other people in your class.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned poker is in poker, they have this thing where it's like a tell, you know, where you know from something about how a person is in space as to whether or not they're telling the truth or they're telling a lie. Are they bluffing or they really have it? And I was thinking back, I used to play a lot of basketball and I was never that fast, but in the flow of the game, if you could anticipate what was going to happen next, what was this guy going to do with the ball next, you could be in that space when the ball went there, where the rebound was going to go, all those kinds of things. So I think that there's an aspect of this where we look at it in terms of like a Professor Cheng, where, as Russ said, Mr. Lowe and people like that, where before you knew what you were going to do, they knew what you were going to do. But I wonder if on the path towards that, there's a development of more and more sensitivity to cues that we can really pick up on in terms of what someone is going to do, whether it's in push hands or in life, in situations where you just see something and you get an idea about what's going to happen next. To get to Susan's point about sort of in the world, how we begin to become sensitive at a deeper level to what's going on around us.
Abandon self, follow the other.
Pardon me?
Abandon self, follow the other.
Well, I would like to say something. I used to do that. I had to drive on the expressway, and I used to do that to anticipate whether somebody was going to pull in front of me or not, or what they were going to do, because I don't know, it was like a little game I would play. Like, this person can't stand it because I'm not tailgating, so they have to pull into that space. And I used to just be able to anticipate what was going to happen. So
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a wonderful example of how, outside of the context of our quote Tai Chi practice, we can be practicing Tai Chi with those kind of ways of being sensitive to the world around us.
And Mike, anybody who's ever been in the car with you knows how you play that game.
I plead the fifth.
Hi,
Michael.
my husband.
Michael.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lou, and I am definitely a beginner. So I'm just taking your invitation at the final moment, nervously. But my study began with Maggie Newman many, many years ago in Philadelphia in the mid 80s, early 80s into the early 90s, and then took a very long detour, very long. I moved out of Philly and really didn't have a teacher. So I'm back into it. And I just can't even tell you how incredible and how helpful this conversation is. I just want to give a shout out in particular, because there's so much, but Robert Chakro talking about, being in the moment, not judging your form, because my form at this point is like really, really rusty and I'm working on it and trying to, do it well, whatever that means. But trying to stay in the moment and the flow. And I just really, really appreciate that concept of non-judging and trying to stay in the moment. I never did get to push hands, so I don't have that experience. It was very brief at one of Maggie's camps in New York. And it was very nerve-wracking. I found the push hands very nerve-wracking. I don't know why. I was a beginner. And anyway, doesn't matter. I just wanted to share that this is incredibly helpful. Trying to share some Qigong and Tai Chi ideas with folks that I work with in community-based behavioral health. And just some basic, flow forms and easy Qigong just for their self-care during this pandemic. And all of this is just, you know, being in the moment with the clients that we work with and our teams. It just has so much richness for me on so many levels. So I just really thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for rising to the occasion and speaking for all those who are not speaking. So
hopefully they will.
I really appreciate you taking the time and courage to share your thoughts on that. It's really helpful to hear that kind of feedback. So thank you very much. Anybody else? Any other comments before we take a break here?
I'd like to speak up, take you up on your invitation.
Okay.
I get really nervous talking in front of a lot of people, but here we go.
Well, just talk to the camera. You're all by yourself.
Just to introduce myself, my name's John Lears. I've been studying just over 20 years. I study with Jane and Batan Feigao, and have done several workshops with many other teachers over the years, and continue to do so, especially once this pandemic ends. I have just been really appreciating this conversation. I really liked what Renee and Liam brought up about having the right reason, right intention. And I guess one thing that really comes up for me, somewhat of a question with push hands, partner exercise. It seems a little more easier, at least grasp the concept of right timing with following somebody else. But with the form, the solo form, it just seems like such a paradox to be, like Natasha was talking about, being in the moment in every moment of the form without having an idea of rushing to the next posture movement. But the paradox that I have to have something in mind to go into the next posture, just the impossibility of that. So that is what kind of triggered me in this conversation.
Well, good. And don't feel like you're alone in that. I heard Robert Smith say once that Professor Cheng himself said that he could not get to the first crossing hands without getting out of the present moment. So the fact that we get out of the present moment during our form practice is par for the course. It's going to happen. I sometimes think of it as we're shepherds and we keep the flock together, and maybe we got them together through a couple of postures and then we're off someplace else. And then we have to notice, the mind has wandered. I'm thinking about buying orange juice on my way home from class today, rather than going into the punch, that the mind wanders. And our job as we go through the form is really to become aware of that, to be aware like, oh, my mind has gone someplace else. I need to gather the flock back together. So, and that's just part of the deal. Along the lines of that, what Lou was saying about not being critical, I think that's really key, because if you're critical of the fact that we don't achieve that level of perfection, we're just going to be beating ourselves up constantly. So let go and jump back into the river. Any other comments to what John just said?
May I say something?
Please.
This is Dot.
Yes, Dot, go ahead.
When I think about the meaning of these words, I have an image that we can look at the image of an astronaut riding in one of those things flying around, like a
Millennial Falcon.
Space station, for example. And time is that space station. And the astronaut has the ability to be in the middle of that time all the time. And that's how the astronaut can do the things they can do, because he knows he's inside of that time thing. And he's there all the time. So that's the kind of image that I think about when I think about the words. And to me, it's an expression of attitude, a philosophy, and an admonition and a challenge. And it's very overwhelming when I think about it in terms of Tai Chi practice. That's all I can say.
May I say a word to John Lears?
Yeah, Liam.
Describing things in language is very, very difficult. And I think that you have to make a distinction between being in the present moment and the instant of time that you exist in. The present moment is larger than the present instant. And if the present moment contains the idea of the next posture, that's something which is happening in the present moment, even if you don't happen to be in the next posture.
Thank you.
So you're allowed, release this tension in your head. You're allowed. Your thought is in the present moment.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah. The heightened awareness of time, I think, is an aspect. When Fred Lehrman was talking weeks and weeks ago, he mentioned something about this, about how Professor Cheng had an ability to control time. And it wasn't so much that Professor could control time, but in each moment of time, he had such a much broader awareness of what was in that moment. My reaction to it was, I've had a couple of moments like that in my life. One when I was in a motorcycle accident. In the moment before I crashed into this car, there was like, that moment was no longer than that, but it was like, just like time stopped and all this stuff was just going in slow motion. And it often makes me think about, like, maybe that's what Professor Cheng could do, is he could have that level of awareness in a moment. And for me, it took death's door to make me realize that possibility. But for Professor Cheng, with his training, could maybe do something like that. And really, that's why it felt like he knows what we're going to do before we do it, because he has that breadth of awareness. Anyway.
Russ had a final comment.
Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to share in closing, and these thoughts come from Wolf Lowenthal from his Long River Taiji newsletter. He's talking about there is no fear because there is no separation. And I think the things that Ellen Jung shared, I think it was just last week, Katie and Ellen were talking about some of the things that Professor had said, and one of those was the 3 fearlessnesses. And Ellen shared those with us. Really, really important and very germane to what we're talking about, I think. So let me just share a couple of lines here, just a few things. He says, the way the study of Shr Jung leads to an alternate understanding of its meaning, how correct timing leads to the center.
Oops.
In application,
Russ, you were staggered for a moment. Go back a little.
Okay.
Maybe start the passage again.
All right. The study of Shr Jung leads to an alternate understanding of its meaning, and that is how correct timing leads to the center of time. Center of time is the alchemy that transforms the torment of change, of time itself, into fearlessness. I think a lot of these things we get hung up in the monkey mind, analyzing ourselves, judging ourselves, and so forth. It's all rooted in fear. And so this author, Stephen Levine, said something: the experience of love arises when we surrender our separateness into the universal. It's a feeling of unity. So when you're perfectly in the center of time, in the moment with your partner in Tuisho, for example, there's a dynamic that you both share in. It's not that you and your partner are separate. You become one thing. He says, you don't love one another. You are one another. There's no fear because there's no separation. And one time Ken Van Sickle asked Ed Young, why is it that Professor never talked about love. And what Mr. Jung answered was, perhaps he never talked about it because love permeates our Tai Chi Chuan. Perfect love casts out fear, the scripture says. So in that quality of fearlessness and that quality of calm heart, quiet mind, in the center of time, in the present moment, fully alive, fully one with what's happening, you are able then to act appropriately in every situation.
I think that's a wonderful way to end the session. Russ, thank you so much for that. Great thoughts for us to take with us today.
Mike?
Yes.
I just have one question I'd like to ask, but not seeking answers.
Okay.
That is the question, there's no time in the middle of time. Does that question make sense?
What's
There's no
the
time
question
in the
again?
middle of time.
Sorry, repeat it again.
Is there time in the middle of time?
Okay, one for you.
Just a question.
One for you all to ponder. We don't need an answer right now.
Right.
Okay. All right. We'd like to thank everyone for coming today, as well as contributing to the session. Just a quick reminder, next week, November 11th, will be Chinese medicine. Daniel Altshuler is going to be elaborating on his previous session on Chinese medicine and looking at the use of herbs, and in particular, prescriptions written by Professor Cheng. And again, if any of you have access to any prescriptions Professor Cheng wrote, please share those with us. We'd like to get them to Daniel so he can begin to break them down and use them as a means to talk about Chinese medicine and the use of herbs. Thank you again for coming. Be safe, and we'll see you all next week.